Did you know the mass killing caused by Genghis Khan cooled the planet's temperature? Sounds like myth, but it's cold, measurable fact. In the 13th century, as Genghis Khan's army swept across the world like wildfire, cities burned, millions died, and the planet itself began to change. Scientists studying ancient climate data found something chilling. Literally, after the Mongol conquests, global carbon levels dropped. And with them the temperature fell. The earth got colder because so many people were dead. Farmlands were abandoned. Entire villages turned to ash. With fewer humans to farm, burn wood, and raise livestock, forests grew back over ruined land. Carbon dioxide in the air decreased. Less smoke, less fire. And the skies cooled. Historians estimate up to 70 million people were killed during Genghis Khan's reign, almost 10% of the world's population. Not from disease. Not from disaster. From cold steel and bone-snapping bowstrings. His was an empire of silence. One that didn't just erase civilizations, it rewrote the atmosphere. And that silence still echoes today. In places like Khorazm, cities were so thoroughly destroyed that only dust remained. Genghis didn't just punish rulers, he made examples. Before every siege, his messengers gave a choice: surrender and live as subjects, or resist and be wiped from memory. In Beijing, after a 3-year siege, survivors turned to cannibalism. It didn't matter. Tens of thousands were still executed. Outside the city walls, Mongols stacked human skulls into pyramids 50 feet high, visible for miles. Travelers thought they were monuments. They were warnings. Entire languages were lost. The Shashia people were exterminated so completely that their voice disappeared from history. Their story was only rediscovered centuries later through strange symbols carved in stone. And through it all, as the bones piled higher and the cities fell, the earth breathed deeper, colder, quieter. This is how our story begins, not with myth, not with legend, but with one brutal truth. Genghis Khan didn't just shape history. He chilled the planet. Before he was Genghis Khan, he was just a boy named Temujin. No throne. No empire. Just hunger and hate. Temujin was born into the windswept steppes of Mongolia around 1162. A land where winter could kill, food was scarce, and loyalty meant nothing if power was at stake. His father was poisoned when Temujin was just 9. The family was abandoned by their tribe, left to starve in the cold. Temujin, his mother, and siblings survived by eating roots, wild animals, and sometimes worse. But the most brutal wound of Temujin's childhood came not from the enemy. It came from his own blood. One night, when food was especially scarce, his older half-brother Bektur caught a fish. But instead of sharing it, Bektur devoured it alone. Temujin asked. Bektur mocked. That was it. A day later, while Bektur was alone, Temujin followed him into the wild, heart pounding with fury and frost. And with the bow his father left behind, he shot his own brother through the chest. Not in battle. Not in defense. But in cold, calculating revenge. He was just 14 years old. Historians still debate the details. Some say it was about food. Others believe Bektur had begun asserting authority as the eldest, threatening Temujin's future. Maybe both. What's certain is that Temujin didn't regret it. When his mother found out, she didn't scream. She didn't disown him. She simply scolded him, and moved on. Because in the Mongol world, power was survival. And survival required blood. That murder, silent, personal, precise, was the first step toward empire. It taught Temujin the lesson he'd never forget. To lead, you must silence your rivals, even if they share your name. By his 20s, Temujin had gathered a small army. Not out of legacy, but out of charisma, cruelty, and loyalty forged in war. Men followed him not because he was royal, but because he never broke a promise, and never forgave a betrayal. And just as he killed his brother, Temujin would go on to kill rivals, former friends, entire families, all to ensure his bloodline would not be broken. This wasn't madness. It was method. Before the world saw Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, it saw a teenage boy staring down the body of his own brother, bow in hand, future in mind. When Temujin became Genghis Khan, he didn't just rule by war. He ruled by fear so absolute, it moved faster than his horses. Before the sword came the whisper. Cities surrendered before his armies arrived, because they had heard the stories. The pyramids of skulls, the rivers of blood, the children thrown into fire, and the silence that followed. Genghis didn't need 1,000 messengers. Terror was his messenger. And it worked. The Mongol strategy was brutally simple. They would approach a city and send a message. Surrender and you'll be spared. Resist, and we will erase you. The city of Nishaper resisted. When the Mongols finally broke through, Genghis's son-in-law was killed. In retaliation, the Khan ordered every single person in the city slaughtered. That's an estimated 1.7 million people, gone. To ensure no one forgot, he stacked their skulls into monuments. Not metaphorically. Literally. Towering pyramids of bones, bleached in the sun, taller than buildings, the kind of structures that make gods go silent. The Mongols didn't loot and leave. They studied siege warfare, learned to break walls with Chinese engineers, used psychological tricks like false retreats to lure armies into traps. But terror was always the core weapon. In Beijing, after a 3-year siege, people began eating each other to survive. When the gates finally fell, the Mongols executed tens of thousands. Outside the city again, skulls piled high. To travelers from a distance they looked like temples. Temples of annihilation. This wasn't senseless slaughter. It was policy. Genghis believed that fear saved time, resources, and soldiers. Why fight 10 battles when one public massacre would make the next 9 cities surrender? Even nature bent to his terror. Rivers were diverted to wash away cities. Whole languages vanished. The Shashia, the Tatars, the Khwarezm, once thriving peoples, were erased so thoroughly only scattered ruins and myths remain. And in the cold silence that followed, the planet cooled. Death made way for forests. Forests cleaned the skies. And the temperature kept falling. This was more than conquest. It was a campaign of psychological domination, enforced with bone, blade, and fire. The great pyramids of Egypt were built to honor kings. Genghis Khan built his thrones out of skulls, to warn the world what happens when you say no. The world feared Genghis Khan's sons. But it was his daughters who quietly devoured kingdoms. They weren't princesses. They were weapons. In the Mongol Empire, marriage wasn't romance, it was strategy. Daughters were currency traded for loyalty, power, or peace. But Genghis Khan used his daughters differently. He didn't marry them off for protection. He married them off to conquer from within. And what followed was more brutal than the battlefield. To marry into the Khan's bloodline was considered an honor, one that came with a price. A tribal leader who accepted a daughter of Genghis had to renounce all his other wives, making her the sole inheritor of his household. Then the groom was sent to the front lines of war, promoted to command, celebrated, and almost always killed in battle. Coincidence? No. Because when he died, the real power passed not to his sons, but to Genghis's daughter. She would rule the tribe, command armies, collect taxes, deliver vengeance, and take orders directly from her father. One daughter, Alakai Beki, ruled over northern China with an iron grip. When a rebellion broke out, she personally crushed it, executing every man involved, and keeping the women and children as servants. Another daughter governed across Central Asia, enforcing Mongol rule from the Silk Road to the edge of Persia. They weren't just symbols. They were sovereigns. Historians now believe that some of the longest-lasting conquests of Genghis Khan were not won by sons, but maintained by daughters, the ones who outlived the bloodshed and governed with the same ruthless precision. They were raised in the doctrine of silence, loyalty, and violence. And like their father, they knew that survival didn't come from love. It came from removing threats before they rose. And just like black widow spiders, once their usefulness expired, their husbands died. So while the world watched the Mongol armies carve blood across continents, they missed the real architects of control, women with royal blood, sharpened minds, and hands unshaken by death. Because in the empire of Genghis Khan, conquest didn't always come on horseback. Sometimes it came with a wedding veil, and a knife behind it. Genghis Khan didn't die in battle. He didn't die from age or betrayal. He died the way a storm disappears, sudden, vast, and eerily quiet. The story goes that during one of his final campaigns, Genghis fell from his horse. There was no assassin, no rival, just a hidden rock in the tall grass and a shattered body beneath it. The conqueror of continents, the terror of nations, ended with a thud on cold earth. But even in death, he planned for control. His body was taken back to Mongolia under the strictest secrecy. The men who carried his corpse were killed immediately after. Those who buried him? Also killed. Some say a river was diverted over his grave to hide it forever. Others believe it lies beneath a sacred mountain, untouched for 800 years. To this day no one knows where Genghis Khan is buried. No monument. No tomb. Just whispers carried by the wind. What? Because even dead, Genghis wanted to rule through fear. Mongols believe that if his grave is disturbed, the Khan of Khans will rise again. And if he returns, it won't be for peace. But perhaps the most chilling legacy isn't what he left behind, but what he erased. Entire peoples vanished. The Shashia, who refused to send warriors to aid him, were hunted down to the last soul. Their language, culture, even their memory was destroyed. For centuries, no one even knew they existed, until archaeologists uncovered stones carved in a forgotten tongue. That was Genghis's true power. Not just killing the body, but killing the story. Even the environment bears his signature. The forests that returned after his massacres still whisper with the cold he left behind. Scientists believe the global cooling from his wars lasted decades. A man so obsessed with domination he accidentally left a scar on the planet itself. His empire fractured after his death. His sons and grandsons split the world like spoils. But the silence, that stayed. Today his name is legend. To some, a hero. To others, a monster. But one truth cuts through both. Genghis Khan didn't just shape history. He burned it, buried it, and vanished into a grave no one dares to find. And perhaps in that silence, he still listens. History doesn't repeat itself, but it whispers, quietly, patiently, waiting for us to forget. If this story made you think, feel, or question, then like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more forbidden chapters they never taught you in school. Because the past isn't dead, it's just buried. And we're here to dig it up.